Come with me to upgrade the fuel tanks on my bike. So we decided to go with the Rally Raid Evo 2 fuel tank kit. It was great that we actually managed to find these. Rally Raid don't sell them online anymore, but we managed to find them on Facebook Marketplace from somebody in Wales who bought them to do a similar work that we're doing to this bike, but never got around to do it. So brand new to us, straight out of the packet, still wrapped up in cellophane and plastic. The reasons I went with these is because a couple of reasons. They add 9.5 litres fuel capacity to my bike. The OEM tank gave me 150 kilometres. These additional tanks give me an additional 100 kilometres, so that gets me to that 250 kilometre mark that I wanted to achieve. The other reason is they're actually super slimline. They sit within the profile of the bike and they look really smart. Let's get started. The kit came from Rally Raid, but actually this tank sits on the left-hand side, which sits over the exhaust, and they only put a very tiny strip of reflective tape actually just down here, which isn't where it's closest to the exhaust pipe anyway, so I didn't feel like it was going to give enough heat protection. I've added a bit more tape where it will be closer to the exhaust, and I'm just learning a lesson from what I've seen on the Adventure, the 950 Adventure, where they've got the split tanks. I've seen that fuel boil and get too hot, and just from where the fuel tank sits so close to the exhaust and the heat transfers straight into the fuel tanks. I'm just trying to learn that lesson now before I start going off on my 250 kilometre rides and end up with very hot fuel. So I've just added a bit of extra tape. Like I said, that's where they put theirs. I've extended it all the way up and across and then in where that recess is. So the tanks are done and they're plumbed in. I'd probably give these of installation a 6 out of 10. Pretty straightforward and easy to install. Wasn't anything overly complex, quite easy to navigate on what you needed to do or figure out what you were doing. I'd give the quality an 8 out of 10. We did have to cut down the OEM radiator cover for it to fit well enough. However, What I am impressed with is the this middle section of fairing, this filler section. I really, really like it. It sits so beautifully between the old bike and the new tank, and it marries really beautifully on both sides. So I'm really chuffed with that section. Overall, I'd probably give the kit a 7 or 8 out of 10. I do like the way it sits. When you look at it from above, the bike doesn't increase too much in size, but you do obviously increase a huge amount in fuel capacity. It's smart, it's sleek. I'm not too sure on this ridge, although I quite like that sort of, that jut, that ridge as an aesthetic. When I sit on the bike, it's exactly where my knee sits. And although I wear knee pads off-road, I'm just wondering how that's going to feel when I'm navigating off-road, if that's going to potentially get in the way. The one thing I would say about the kit is I do have a quick release valve down here that separates the rear tank to the two front tanks, which is great, but for maintenance it would mean that I'd be able to quick release here, but I would have fuel between the line at this point to the front sections of the fuel tanks here. So if at any point I needed to take them off for maintenance, I would still then have fuel in the line that would obviously then run out, and I might not have great control of, and potentially a bit of a mess. So I would prefer, if I could, to install some quick release valves per side on each of the tanks for ease of removal. But at the meantime, I'll probably leave it as it is, and potentially in the future look to install valves on each one if I feel like it would be a benefit. If I were to do it again or pass on tips to somebody who is going to do it themselves in the future, I'd probably say one of a couple of things. We did siphon the fuel out as best we could with a hand siphon. We did find that actually once we'd got what we thought the majority of the fuel was out, there was actually quite a bit of residual fuel sat at the bottom of that tank. So when we went to remove the fuel pump from underneath, there was quite an overspill of fuel that we had to catch under a bucket. We were expecting a little bit, but not quite as much as not quite as much as what came out. So I think I'd probably be persistent on that fuel extraction rather than just going, oh, that will do. Another point I'd say is probably with the instructions, they were relatively clear, but there were aspects that it was almost back to front. The image didn't always match the description, so you kind of had to reread it a few times just to understand what they were describing and where you were looking. And equally, I think the third point would be the instructions refer to a very stripped back, straight out of manufacture KTM. You're going to find variations and modifications on your bike that you probably weren't expecting. So just to check what you're doing and make sure you're comfortable with what's on your bike before moving anything, if you're moving anything at all. We have a rally tower arriving / part arrived, and we're really looking forward to taking you along and showing you what that's going to look like. Let's change